Welcome to everybody. This webinar today is about lifelong learning. When Mary contacted me a year or so ago about doing this, these learning communities, I thought this is just a great opportunity to do things. So what I'm going to try to do today is to direct my attention to those of you who are college age or bound or have been in college or are remotely interested in that sort of thing. And just talk a bit about the problems that we have after we leave that part of our lives where we deal with teachers. We are students all the time. And when do we become teachers? And how do we become teachers of ourselves? Because I firmly believe that we are the best teachers we will ever have. There will never be any better teacher for us than ourselves. So the most important thing to remember, I think, is to go back to the beginning and remember who you are in the context of everything. Now, I started to play the clarinet when I was 9 years old, which in retrospect is too young, but I have no control over retrospect. I was a completely different person. I was a kid. I was little. My hands, my arms, everything about me were smaller than they are today. And I have grown and gotten bigger in some good ways and some not so good ways. And I still see myself in many ways as that little kid back there. And everything I have become today is the result of tiny step after tiny step after tiny step after tiny step. So that sort of I am that 9-year-old kid a few years later. So when we finish our education, our formal education, let's say, we start teaching. And I don't know about you, but I discovered that when I started teaching, the words that came out of my mouth were the words that the teacher had put in my ears. I would open my mouth and there would be John Ullman talking, or I would open my mouth and there would be Henry Gulick talking. And I opened my mouth and it would be someone I heard in a masterclass somewhere talking. And gradually you start to absorb all of these sorts of things, and you, by teaching, become a better teacher because you start putting all of these things together. But I think many times we don't take those principles and look at ourselves and we don't look inward on what we do. Uh, we spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with ourselves, as opposed to that hour with that student, that teacher, 1 day a week. So surely in this 24/7 culture, we can figure out things and figure out how to solve problems. All right, so how do you solve the problems? I think the thing that people forget is that they don't go back to the beginning. They don't remember the very beginning of things. They don't think about in its things in their simplest form. What always comes back to me is the famous Occam's razor, which is, and I'm going to read it to make sure I get the dictionary version of this correctly, which is, other things being equal, simpler explanations are better than more complicated ones. I think we make things too complicated when we're trying to fix problems sometimes. It's, oh my gosh, I can't play this passage. I can't do this. I'm out of tune here. Something's wrong. What's wrong? What can I do? Well, go back to the beginning. Go back to the very beginning. Keep it simple and think binary choices. I think binary choices are incredibly important to understand. There are a couple of things that come to mind. One is about music theory class. I always talk about music theory in lessons and that sort of stuff. And sometimes I look at students and they're looking at me like I'm with their eyes glazed over, like I'm from Mars and I have no idea what I'm talking about. And I have to remember or remind them, let's put it this way. For example, in tonal harmony, there's only tonic and everything else. Forget that 5/4 6, 2, flat 2s, augmented 6th chords, Italian. Forget those kinds of things. What's important is it's tonic or it's not. You can apply the same principle to rhythm. I've always thought that rhythm was taught in such an absolutely complicated way. We teach it sometimes with this 1E and a 2E and a whatever kind of syllables you want to use, but we lose track of what's most important, and that is a note is either on the beat or it isn't. It's very simple, right? Two choices, on or not. The not part gets a little more complicated. Is it halfway through the beat? Is it a third way through the beat? Is it a fourth way? Is it a fifth way through the beat? Whatever it is, we can figure that out. But we have to remember where the beat is, where it goes. And a lot of times we get too complicated too quickly. So never, oh, the other example, I almost forgot that one. This is my other favorite one, is intonation. Oh, I'm sharp on this note, I'm flat on this note, I'm whatever. All you have to remember is you're in tune or you're not. There are only two choices. What that in tune is another matter. That's the next level of thinking. Is it put on my tuner and make sure my A is at 440, God's pitch, or is it a little lower or a little higher? And what's the context of the pitch? Is it the third of the chord? Is it the fifth of the chord? Where does it go? Is it a leading tone? Is it going to resolve down? What is it? Well, it's not always 440. So you have to play in tune in context. So I'm giving you all of these examples to remind you that you have to start at the beginning. If you start at the end, you're not going to get anywhere in solving problems except to greater levels of frustration. Never overlook the obvious. Basic things are very important. And the other thing, which is kind of one of my life's credos, is question everything. Was what she said in my lesson really true in my situation, about my hand position, or about my posture, or about my breathing, right? Was it really true, right? We have to remember that we are the best teachers we ever have. We have to find the things that work for us and then apply all of those things to ourselves. Pardon my redundancy. There'll be a lot of that going on in the next 20 minutes or so. Don't forget to use obvious things when you're practicing, like your ears and your eyes. Video yourself. Back in the dark ages, we recorded ourselves. All right, recording is great. We use mirrors rather. We did not record ourselves. Now we record ourselves. Recording devices are everywhere. You can find perfectly good ways to record yourself. You can really see yourself recorded by an objective third electronic person, and you can go back and listen to yourself. So practicing and how you practice and how you record your practice are very important. Okay, now I think too, there are two kinds of very important practice. There's what I've come to call intentional practice, which is you sit down, we've all done this, we spend hours and hours doing this kind of thing, and we practice very intensively about what is the sound of my open G, right? The famous root note on the clarinet, right? A good friend of mine once told me that when he was in college, his teacher spent one complete lesson on nothing but open G. And we become sort of obsessive, we become compulsive about those kind of things. And that's important. That's an important facet of practicing. How we plan things out, when we do things. Do I warm up? How much time do I spend? Do I play scales? Do I play arpeggios? All that kind of stuff that we put in our daily routine are very important, and they have to be practiced in a very disciplined sort of way. with metronomes, without metronomes, all that typical stuff, with tuners, without tuners, with drones, all kinds of things like that are incredibly important. But there's another kind of practice, I think, that we overlook sometimes, and oftentimes we look on it as a bad thing, and that is just tinkering, messing around on the clarinet. We have to do that sort of thing. What do I do when I'm sort of not thinking and playing and jumping from one thing to the other sporadically, playing scales and arpeggios and things? What good can possibly come out of that? Well, for Bill Smith, who was featured in yesterday's concerts and presentations, it gave us this whole vocabulary, this messing around, this tinkering with the clarinet. It gave us a whole new world of multiphonics and effects and all kinds of things. If it wasn't for Bill Smith's tinkering, this would have never happened. And I can't tell you the number of problems, my own personal problems, and I'm going to get into some of those in a minute or so, that I have fixed or improved by just fooling around, by just tinkering. Now, we can do too much of this, we can do too much of the other. Okay, but both are important. The next thing that I want to mention is be sure in this whole process that you take breaks. That sounds like a stupid thing. Everybody needs to rest. Oh, I'm tired of sitting. I'm tired of standing. I'm tired of working on the first 8 bars of the Mozart first movement. I'm just tired of all this. I have to take a break. So I get up and I move around. I'm physically changing and I'm resting my arms and I'm stretching and I'm doing all kinds of things. But you're also resting your mind. Your mind is someplace else. And while you're doing those kinds of things, your mind is still working. Any of you who know me and have talked to me for any enough time know that I'm a crossword puzzle doer. I'm not very good at it. I do the New York Times crossword puzzle, which starts on Monday and goes through Sunday and gets harder as the week goes along till Saturday, and then there's Sunday's a big day, right? I've told people when my biography is written, they're going to say he was a Wednesday guy. That's kind of the point where I can get it without doing a lot of delicate assistance from Google to find answers. And even in some cases, I don't solve the problem. But I walk away from the kitchen table or where I'm working, and I go around, and I practice the clarinet. Maybe I practice that opening 8 bars of the Mozart clarinet concerto. And I got a little better because I did something else. I can't solve any problem. I get up, I walk back to the kitchen table and fill in 10 new places. Because while I'm doing this has happened. So take a rest. So use your eyes, use your ears, record yourself, use those tools, and take breaks. Okay? Now, let's talk a little bit about technique and the clarinet, for example. The clarinet is nothing more than a tool. It's no different than using any other tool. We have to learn to use a tool correctly. I remember when someone taught me how to use a hammer, how to hammer nails, right? But you don't hammer nails like this. You hammer nails with your wrist. You lead with your wrist. Makes a whole lot of difference in the way the hammer works. Well, it's applying that very simple principle to the playing of the clarinet specifically that makes all the difference. And the clarinet is only a tool, right? It's the object that lies between us and Mozart. Right? A good friend of mine, Daryl Code, quoted me something from, I can't remember an oboist who it was, who said this to him, is never take no for an answer from an inanimate object. It's a thing, and we have to figure out how to do this thing and how to play this instrument. The other big mistake we make in practicing sometimes is we try to practice too many things at once. We'll go back to that Mozart 8 bars, that famous 8 bars a little bit, right? Are you talking about breathing? Are you talking about making great music? Or how do you make the great music? What do you want to do? What fingering do I use here? Do I want Do I want to play the next downbeat? Do I want to play a crescendo? There are all these kinds of things. We have, how's the rhythm? And we try to do this all at once. Practice one thing. I'm going to think about music. I'm going to think about rhythm. I'm going to think about phrasing. I'm going to think about tone. Gee, I don't like the sound of that E natural. What's wrong with the E natural? Okay, fix it. Right? What do you have to do to fix it? Well, sometimes it's directed practice and doing all that long tones, and sometimes it's just tinkering around to find out what works and what sounds better. Okay, so you find the problem, you identify the problem, you practice correctly, and you fix the problem. All right. Now, fixing the problem can be a pretty tricky thing. One of those expressions I use in lessons all the time is words matter. I think words are important. The way we speak to people, the way we address people, what we say, how we say it, makes a huge difference. We want to be, on the clarinet, poets. We want to be Shakespeare. We don't want to be texters. Mozart is not about texting. You got to find the right words in the right context to make Mozart Mozart. So playing things in the most beautiful fashion you can is important, right? But saying the right things about them is important. This is true with everything in life. I don't care what you're talking about, whether you're trying to make friends with your new neighbors or whatever. But the goal in all of this is to make great music. That's what it's all about. All right, now, let me use a couple of words. I'll grab my clarinet here for a second. Let me use a couple of words which I think are probably in my own professional career have been the worst words I have ever heard used to describe these kinds of issues on the clarinet. And they're words that still haunt me from that 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid. And that is, people used to say to me, oh, you can't play it, use a fake fingering. Fake fingering. Great idea, fake fingerings. The other thing is they'll talk about cheating fingerings or cheaters fingering. Well, how can I cheat to make it work better? Well, you know what? They're not fake. They're not cheater fingerings. They're fingerings that help me do what I need to do on the clarinet to make it better. You remember, when we all started, hope you can see my hands here, is we played C and then we opened up and we played G. That's the way we learned to go down across the register break, at least if we were taught well. So you leave this hand down. So you leave the right hand down. So when you cross the register break, you leave the right hand down. Well, that's cheating. You shouldn't do that. That's not the fingering for C. I looked at the fingering chart. Look, all those dots and numbers and letters there. That's not C. This is C. This is G. Nothing down. G is open G, right? You can't put any more fingers down. Well, we all know that there are resonance fingers you can use, but there are also things you can do to help you cross the register break. And then you realize, well, if I cross the register break in a C major scale, I can go G, A, and stick some fingers down and then play B and C. Well, to some people, that's cheating. If it accomplishes the musical goal, it is not cheating. If it makes you get across the register break better, it is not cheating. It's a fingering. It's an alternate fingering, a varied fingering, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so I have a problem crossing the register break. What's the problem? Well, normally people say it's this guy, this rocking, rolling thing back and forth in this finger. And you cross the register break and you work about this, and I'm not using this finger correctly. And then all of a sudden, you look at yourself in the mirror, in my age of growing up, or the recording device, and what you find out is the ring finger of your left hand sometimes isn't closing the third hole. The problem's not here, the problem's here. So you find the problem, you figure out how to fix it, and then you've accomplished something. And then of course, you remember, you replicate that fixing. All right, so there's one example. Let me use another example here. The same kind of deal. When you first learned to play the clarinet, probably you play B flat in the upper register with the thumb, first two fingers, and the bottom key over here, right? It's the most utilitarian B flat on the B flat, E flat, B flat on the clarinet. You can get kind of from just about every place to every other place with that, right? And then somebody comes along and says, oh, you know, there's this little key down here. You know, you can also use that. Okay, that's an alternate fingering. You can kind of keep things in the B flat scale, B flat C, D, E flat F, keep them in the same hand. Then you keep going and you add something across the register break and you produce a really good B flat scale. You haven't used two different wrong cheater fingering, fake fingerings. Okay, so then you go and you get this B flat, right? The one that's 1 and 1. The 1 and 1 are 1 and 2, 1 and 3. They get sharper as you go on the clarinet. Well, that works in an arpeggio. Well, I don't really like to use that very much. I'd rather use the side fingering. Okay, use the side fingering. It's important to use those regular fingerings for B flat. But this will get you out of all kinds of binds in arpeggios. Depends on the situation. If it's a slow, beautiful, lyrical arpeggio and you want to make the quality of the sound and the pitch beautiful, of course, use the side B flat. It just sounds a little bit better to me, or to me, to you, right? So therefore, this becomes, in essence, a fake fingering on the clarinet. It's not a fake fingering. Use it. Oh, well, if I play F to B flat, it's pretty well in tune, but when I do it in the lower register and play B flat to E flat, the E flat is sharp. That's just the acoustics of the instrument. Well, if you're playing slowly, that's a problem. If you're playing the Saint-Saëns sonata, it's a godsend. You have to use these fingerings in certain situations because it is more important to play with facility between those two notes in that situation than it is to be perfectly well in tune, whatever that is, whether it's with the tuner or your ear or the context of the music. That's what's important. So those fake fingerings, they're not fake fingerings. They're alternate fingerings. They're different ways of doing things. So I would encourage you never use a word like fake or cheater or something like that. You know, when I was a kid growing up, those were horrible words. Oh, you're such a fake. You cheated on a test. You're going to get an F. Am I going to get an F in the Mozart concerto because I used a different fingering? No. If it serves a musical purpose, it's all going to be just fine. Okay, now let's look at one more little thing. Is when you use these fingerings in context, or when do you use them? When do you use them and when should you use them? The should is always musical effect. The result is what you're after, right? We all know this famous passage. Wrong key in the Mozart clarinet concerto, right? Where you have to go. Right, the famous passage, right? And I was taught rather to play A sharp da da dee da dee da. Then you flip dee da da dum. Well, there's always that little flip in there. That finger going up and finger going down at the same time. We have to get just right. Well, that's because you don't want to use that fake fingering for B, right? Well, you know what? You can get pretty good at that. You can get pretty good at going B flat, A, G, flip from these fingers to this finger's going down. Oh, that's a fake fingering. I'm cheating when I do that. It means I can't do the flip very well. Do you need to learn how to flip your fingers like that? You bet you do. You need to spend a lot of time learning how to do that. But in the context, this works better. I don't want to learn how to do that. That's hard. Okay, what happens in the upper register if you're playing an E major scale? You go B, C sharp, D sharp, E. Forget this hand. What happens in this finger? We work for hours to play that C sharp, D sharp, E correctly. Otherwise, you're going to play with the second finger and it's flat. It's out of tune. It's a lousy, in the key of E, it's horrible. It's out of tune. I mean, it's really terrible. But if you use this one, it's pretty good. Yeah, I know it's a little flat sometimes too. We have to do thumb things, to make it get up to pitch. But it's a better fingering in that context. And we practice it forever, but we practiced it up here in the upper register instead of down there in the lower register. And sometimes the solution to problems are someplace other than the place we're looking. Okay. I'm going to talk quickly about one more thing, and then I have to stop. I find it ironic that the session that follows me is called Put a Cork in It. So I have to put a cork in it and stop, right? And that is, I have always had a problem with my hand position in the right hand. I tend to play flat fingered if I'm not careful. And I tried to fix it, and people say, curve your finger. Great, problem solved, right? Curve your finger. Okay, I've got that fixed, but you don't. And you start fooling around with things and tinkering, as it were, and you discover that, these problems I'm having in this hand with those kinds of things in this hand have to do more, especially in this hand, the left hand, with finger position. Well, what if I touch the key here instead of here? I'm exaggerating things, obviously, here and here, right? There are all kinds of different places we can touch keys. And what I discovered is if I just lowered my wrist just a little bit, it put everything in a different position. So for me, that helped me solve the problem. Now here's the other problem with technique is clarinets are different. Clarinets are the same, I should say. They're kind of basically kind of chunky keys, and they're designed for everybody. They're the off-the-rack medium shirt or medium pair of pants. And by making a medium, it doesn't fit everybody. But they've done really wonderful things in shaping keys to make them different shapes. So lots of different people with lots of different hand sizes and arm lengths and things like that can play the instrument correctly, or play the instrument efficiently, I should say. So if you look at my hands, I have pencil fingers. I have long, skinny fingers. I have friends that have big, chunky fingers and short fingers. I have seen people with gigantic hands play the clarinet beautifully. I've seen people with tiny fingers play the clarinet beautifully. And they're all different. So you have to figure out what works for you. One of the things I have learned from watching concerts in this virtual ClarinetFest is looking at the great clarinet players of the world up close and watching them. And I can tell you, I have seen what are some of the most questionable hand and arm and finger positions I have ever seen in my life in some of these. And they have produced some of the most beautiful music you could imagine. So the goal here, how you solve these problems with these short, long, fat, skinny fingers, is entirely dependent on the short, fat, whatever fingers you have and the body that you have. So you have to adjust all of these things to make them work. Okay, I hope I've given you a few ideas about the kind of things that you can do to make it work. If you have any other questions for me, I think we've got about a minute left here. And you can email me. My email address is john.scott@unt.edu. And I'll be glad to answer your questions as best as possible. If we have a question there somewhere, Jessica, that's.
Yeah, we have one question here from Tim who wants some suggestions of fun or memorable projects or tinkering activities when you haven't had a lot of performing opportunities during a summer or winter break, for example.
Oh, I'll tell you exactly one of the ones I do. And I've done this for years. I humiliate myself by going back to the Rose 32 studies and starting from scratch. This summer, I started from the end and I'm working my way back to the front. And every time I play them, I learn something new and I look at something from a different perspective. I've got two different editions I use. I use a modern edition, and I also use the one that still has my lesson assignments from 1965 written up in the corner, right, with my fingers in. And I keep going in, and I keep changing fingerings. No, this is left and right. No, I've got a left hand A flat, E flat key. Now I can do it this way. I have to learn all kinds of different things. You have to keep yourself fresh. So the old stale stuff, the Rose 32 studies, or the first 8 bars of the first move in the Mozart exposition are good for the rest of your life.
I think that's great advice. Then we'll leave it at that. I typed John's email address in there. I'm also dropping the link to the next session. Put a cork in it, and we will do just that. Thank you
Okay.
so much, John. And we will see you all in the next session. Thank you so much.
11 o'clock on the nose.
All right.
Thanks.
Great
Bye.
job. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.